There are debts that can be settled with money. And then there are debts of the soul. I used to think I only dealt in the first kind. I was a practical man, a man of ledgers and land deeds, of transactions that were clean, simple, and devoid of messy things like emotion. My world was built on the solid bedrock of logic. But then I met Silas, and he proposed a payment that had no place in any ledger I'd ever kept. He offered me his daughter. The air in his small, dilapidated farmhouse was thick with the smell of dust, desperation, and decaying wood. Silas Blackwood was a man weathered into the shape of his misfortunes. His shoulders stooped, his hands trembled, and his eyes held the hollowed-out look of a man who had already lost everything but was about to lose a little more. The debt he owed me wasn't massive, not to me, but to him. It was a mountain he could never hope to climb. His farm was failing, his wife had passed years ago, and his spirit was broken. "I can't pay you, Arthur," he'd rasped, his voice thin as autumn leaves. "The blight took the corn, and the well's been running low. I have nothing left." I looked around the sparse room, my gaze clinical. It was true, the man was destitute. I was about to propose a payment plan, something I rarely did, perhaps a small flicker of pity I hadn't yet extinguished. But before I could speak, he leaned forward, his eyes gleaming with a strange, feverish light. "But I have something to offer," he said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "A different kind of payment. My daughter, Elara." I stared at him, my mind struggling to process the words. It felt like a scene from a bygone century, a barbaric arrangement that had no place in the modern world. "Your daughter?" I repeated, my voice flat. "She's a good worker," Silas pressed on, misinterpreting my silence as consideration. "Strong, quiet. She can cook, clean, tend to the house. You have that big place of yours, all empty. She'd be of use. The debt would be cleared. For good." He said it like he was offering me a prize-winning heifer. The sheer callousness of it was breathtaking. But there was something else in his eyes, something deeper than just a desperate attempt to clear a debt. It was fear. He was afraid of her. I could see it. And right then, I knew this wasn't just about money. It was about something twisted and dark that had taken root in this small town. It's strange how things you don't see can have such a hold on people. Speaking of which, I've been told that YouTube has been unsubscribing people from channels without them knowing. Do me a quick favor, and just check if you're still subscribed. It takes a second, and it helps ensure you won't miss the next chapter of this story. Now, back to that farmhouse. I leaned back in my chair, the wood groaning under my weight. "Why, Silas? Why would you offer your own flesh and blood like a piece of property?" He flinched, looking away towards the grimy window. "She's different," he mumbled. "The folks in town, they talk, they say she's cursed." Cursed. The word hung in the air between us, ancient and ugly. I was a man of logic, not superstition. I'd heard the whispers, of course. Living near a town like Harmony Creek meant you heard everything. Elara Blackwood, the girl who brought misfortune. They said her birth had coincided with a drought. A barn fire on a neighboring farm was blamed on a look she gave the owner. Sick livestock, failed crops. If it went wrong in Harmony Creek, somehow the blame always found its way back to that quiet, withdrawn girl. "You believe that nonsense?" I asked, a cynical edge to my voice. "I don't know what to believe anymore," Silas admitted, his voice cracking. "All I know is that there's no life for her here. They shun her, they cross the street to avoid her. With you, she'd be away from all that. She'd have a roof over her head. It's a better chance than she has here." It was a twisted, pathetic justification. But I saw the core of his desperation. He wasn't just trying to pay a debt, he was trying to exile his daughter in a way that let him sleep at night. He was handing his problem off to me. My first instinct was to refuse, to walk out and write off the debt as a loss. It was the clean, simple thing to do. But I hesitated. My house was large and empty. It had been since my wife Martha passed. It was a place of echoing silence, of dust motes dancing in sunbeams, a mausoleum of a life that was no more. I lived on routine and order, but the silence was a constant gnawing presence. The idea of another person there, even a silent, cursed one, was intriguing. A disruption, and a small cold part of me, the part that always calculated the angles, saw the utility in it. A live-in housekeeper for the price of a forgotten debt. It was a sound transaction. "I'll do it," I said, the words feeling foreign on my tongue. "Have her ready by morning." Silas looked at me. A wave of relief so profound it almost buckled him. He nodded wordlessly, his gratitude mingled with a shame so deep it was hard to watch. I left without another word, the deal sealed. I told myself it was just business, a practical solution to two problems. I was a man who managed assets, and Elara Blackwood was now one of them. I refused to let the town's medieval fears cloud my judgment. The next morning, she was standing on my porch, a single small burlap sack at her feet. She was younger than I'd imagined, perhaps 19 or 20. She was plain, with mousy brown hair tied back messily, and a simple threadbare dress that hung loosely on her thin frame. She didn't look cursed. She just looked lost. Her eyes were the most striking thing about her. They were a deep, clear gray, like a stormy sky, and they watched me with an unnerving stillness, a resilience that seemed out of place with the rest of her timid demeanor. There was no fear in them, no anger, just a quiet, weary acceptance. "I'm Arthur," I said, my voice sounding unnecessarily harsh. "I know," she replied. Her voice was soft, barely a whisper. I led her inside. The house swallowed her whole. She looked tiny and insignificant against the high ceilings and dark wood of my foyer. I showed her to a small room at the back of the house, furnished with a simple bed and a dresser. It was clean, sterile, and joyless, much like the rest of the house. "Your chores will be to cook, clean, and tend to the garden out back. You will have your meals after I have had mine. You will not speak unless spoken to. Is that understood?" I laid out the rules like a drill sergeant. It was easier that way, creating a barrier of formality between us. She just nodded, her gaze fixed on the floor. "Good," I said, turning to leave. I paused at the door, a thought striking me. "The things they say about you in town, is any of it true?" She looked up then, and for the first time, her gray eyes met mine directly. A flicker of something, defiance maybe, or just profound sadness passed through them. "People see what they want to see, Mr. Arthur," she said softly. "A shadow is just a shadow, until you decide to call it a monster." And with that, she turned and began unpacking her meager belongings from the burlap sack. I closed the door, a strange feeling of unease settling over me. The transaction was complete. But as I walked away down the long, silent hallway, I had the unsettling feeling that I didn't understand the terms of the deal at all. The first few weeks passed in a structured, sterile silence. Elara was a phantom in my house. She moved with a quiet efficiency that was almost unnerving. The floors were scrubbed, the dust vanished, and the air, which had always been stale with disuse, now carried the faint, pleasant scent of lemon oil and baking bread. She was an impeccable worker, adhering to my rules with a precision that should have pleased me, but it didn't. It unsettled me. She was a ghost at the edges of my life. I would come downstairs in the morning to find a simple breakfast laid out on the kitchen table. When I came home in the evenings, the scent of a simmering stew would greet me, a plate left warming in the oven. We rarely crossed paths. She was a master of disappearing, of melting into the background. It was as if she was trying to take up as little space in the world as possible. The first real test of our arrangement came during my weekly trip into Harmony Creek for supplies. The moment I stepped into Miller's General Store, the usual hum of conversation died down. All eyes were on me. Old man Miller, who I'd known for 30 years, polished the counter with a sudden intense focus, refusing to meet my gaze. "Just the usual, Henry," I said, placing my list on the counter. He grunted, gathering my items with a new stiffness in his movements. A few of the town's women were whispering by the fabric aisle, their sidelong glances feeling like tiny daggers. Finally, Martha Higgins, the town's chief gossip, couldn't contain herself any longer. "Arthur," she said, her voice dripping with faux concern, we heard you took in the Blackwood girl." "I did," I replied curtly, not giving her an inch. Is that wise? She pressed. You know her reputation. Bad things follow that girl. Remember the Petersons' barn, burned to the ground a week after she was seen walking by. A faulty wire caused that fire, Martha. The fire marshal said so himself. And what about the fever that took half the livestock on the ridge last spring? Another man chimed in. Started right after she helped her father mend a fence near there. It was absurd. A town's collective grief and fear, looking for a scapegoat, had landed on the shoulders of a quiet, lonely girl. I found myself growing angry, not for Elara, but for the sheer infuriating stupidity of it all. It was an insult to my intelligence that they would expect me to believe such nonsense. She is a worker in my house, I stated, my voice cold and final. My business is my own. I paid for my supplies and left, the weight of their judgment following me out the door. The ride home was tense. Their whispers had gotten under my skin. Not because I believed them, but because they had forced me to actively defend my decision, to align myself with the town's pariah. When I got back, the house was silent as usual, but as I put the supplies away in the pantry, I saw Elara through the kitchen window. She was in the garden, kneeling in the dirt, gently tending to the struggling tomato plants. The garden was my late wife's. Since her passing, I'd let it fall into neglect. It was a patch of weeds and stubborn, withered stalks. But now, under Elara's care, small signs of life were returning. She moved with a patient grace, her hands coaxing life from the barren soil. There was nothing menacing about her. She looked like a part of the earth itself, calm and serene. A few days later, the curse was supposed to strike. One of my goats, an old nanny named Daisy, had fallen ill. She was weak, refusing to eat, and her breathing was shallow. I'd seen this before. It was usually the end. I'd resolved to put her out of her misery in the morning. That evening, I mentioned it offhandedly to Elara, as she cleared my dinner plate. Old Daisy is on her way out. I'll have to take care of it tomorrow. I expected her to nod silently, as she always did. But instead, she paused. May I see her? She asked, her voice barely audible. Surprised by the request, I just shrugged. She's in the small pen by the barn, but don't bother. There's nothing to be done. I went to my study to read, and forgot about it. The next morning, I woke early, and walked out to the pen, my rifle in hand. But I stopped short. The pen gate was open, and Daisy was gone. A flash of irritation went through me. Had she wandered off to die in the woods? Then I heard a soft sound coming from the barn. I pushed the heavy barn door open. Inside, in a makeshift bed of clean straw, lay Daisy. Elara was kneeling beside her, stroking her head and murmuring softly. A bowl of what looked like a mashed poultice of herbs sat next to her. Daisy was awake, and she was chewing weakly on a handful of fresh clover Elara was offering. She looked up at me, her gray eyes calm. Her fever broke an hour ago, she said simply. She just needed some willow bark and chamomile, and someone to sit with her. I stood there, rifle hanging uselessly in my hand, and stared. The town saw her as a harbinger of sickness and death. But here she was, in my barn, patiently, skillfully, nurturing a creature back to life. I had been ready to kill it. She had healed it. That evening, for the first time, I told her to sit down and eat her dinner at the table with me. She looked surprised, hesitant, but she complied. We ate in silence for a while, the clinking of our forks the only sound. The goat, I finally said. How did you know what to do? My mother taught me about herbs, she said, not looking up from her plate. She said the earth provides the cure for most ailments, if you know where to look. And the town, I pushed, what they say, doesn't it bother you? She finally lifted her head, and her gaze was steady and clear. It used to, she confessed. It felt like a heavy cloak I couldn't take off. But after a while, you realize the cloak isn't yours, it belongs to them. It's woven from their fear. I'm just the one they forced to wear it. The simplicity and profound wisdom of her words struck me. I had seen her as a transaction, a problem, a worker. But in that moment, sitting across from me at my own table, I saw a person who had been carrying a weight that would have crushed most people, yet she hadn't broken. She had simply learned to live with it, quietly, and with a dignity I couldn't comprehend. The first crack had appeared in the foundation of my cold, logical world. The incident with the goat changed something in the house. It changed something in me. The rigid, silent order I had established began to soften, to fray around the edges. I stopped seeing Elara as just a set of hands that kept my house in order. I started to see her. I noticed the little things. A wild flower she'd picked from the meadow, placed in a small glass on the windowsill, catching the morning light. The way she would hum a soft, nameless tune while she worked in the garden. She was slowly, quietly breathing life back into the hollow spaces of my home, and I found I didn't mind. In fact, a part of me, a part I had long thought dead, welcomed it. My evenings were no longer spent in solitary silence in my study. I'd find myself lingering in the kitchen after dinner, asking her about the garden, or what herbs she was drying by the hearth. Her answers were always brief, but they were no longer clipped with fear or reservation. A tentative trust was growing between us, as delicate as the seedlings in her garden. This newfound peace was, of course, too good to last. Harmony Creek wouldn't allow it. It happened on a Tuesday. I was out back, mending a fence, when I saw a procession of 3 trucks rumbling up my long driveway. I recognized them immediately. One belonged to Henry Miller from the general store, another to Deacon Price, the self-righteous leader of the local church. The third belonged to a farmer whose land bordered mine. This wasn't a social call. I set down my tools and walked to the front of the house to meet them. My jaw set. Elara had seen them too. I caught a glimpse of her face in the window, her expression a familiar mask of weary resignation. They got out of their trucks, a grim-faced delegation of concerned citizens. Deacon Price, a portly man with a Bible, always tucked under his arm, stepped forward as the spokesman. "Arthur," he began, his tone pious and grave, "we've come to talk to you as friends, as neighbors." "You look more like a mob, Deacon," I replied, my voice dangerously low. I stood on my porch, creating a physical barrier between them and my front door. I could feel the anger rising in me, hot and unfamiliar. For years, I had prided myself on my detachment, but seeing them standing there, ready to cast their judgment, ignited something protective in me. It's funny how a situation can reveal what you truly care about. If you're finding this story compelling, let me know what you think is going to happen next in the comments below. Your engagement really helps. Deacon Price ignored my comment. "It's about the girl," he said, gesturing dismissively toward the house. "Her presence here is a danger to us all. We've had 2 calves born sickly this week. Miller's wife has taken ill. It's the curse, Arthur. You've brought it right to your doorstep, and it's starting to leach out into the community." The sheer, unadulterated ignorance of his words left me speechless for a moment. They were blaming this poor girl for a common cold, and the realities of animal husbandry. "My wife has the flu," Henry Miller chimed in, his face pale with worry. "The doctor said so, but she started feeling poorly right after you were in the store, Arthur. You brought the girl's shadow in with you." "That's enough," I said, my voice ringing with an authority I hadn't used in years. "You are not welcome here. What you call a curse, I call cruelty. You've spent years tormenting a child, blaming her for every misfortune and act of God that befalls this town, because you are too weak and fearful to face the randomness of life." I stepped down off the porch, meeting them eye to eye. "You're not afraid of her curse. You're afraid of anything you don't understand. You've let that fear turn you into monsters. Now get off my property before I have you removed for trespassing." They were shocked into silence. They had expected me to be a reasonable man, to listen to their neighborly concerns. They had never seen this side of me, the cold fury, the absolute defense of my home, and to my own surprise, its inhabitant. They mumbled amongst themselves, their righteous certainty crumbling in the face of my anger. Defeated, they shuffled back to their trucks and drove away, leaving a cloud of dust and resentment in their wake. I stood there for a long time, my heart pounding. When I turned, the front door opened,
Elara was standing there, her hands clasped in front of her. There were tears silently tracking paths down her cheeks, but her eyes weren't filled with sadness. It was something else, gratitude. That night the dam of her silence finally broke. We sat at the kitchen table, a single lamp casting a warm glow around us. "Why did you do that?" she asked softly. "No one has ever stood up for me before, not even my father." "Because they were wrong," I said simply. She looked down at her hands. "The curse," she said, the word tasting like poison. "It started when I was born. My mother, she died, giving birth to me. My father was broken by it. He loved her more than anything. After she was gone, he couldn't look at me without seeing what he had lost. He never said it, but I know a part of him blamed me." The story poured out of her, a quiet, heartbreaking torrent. Her father, lost in his grief, had become distant and cold. The narrative that she was bad luck began with his own inability to cope. A grieving man's whisper became a town's superstition. The other children wouldn't play with her. Adults would see her and make signs to ward off evil. Every childhood stumble, every teenage misfortune, was layered with the weight of this curse, until the burden became her entire identity. So when he offered me to you, I pieced it together, the awfulness of it dawning on me. He wasn't trying to get rid of a curse. He was trying to save me, she finished, her voice thick with emotion. In his own broken, terrible way, he thought sending me away, even to a stranger, was the only way I could escape. He was too weak to fight the town for me, so he sent me away from the fight. I sat back, the weight of it all pressing down on me. This wasn't a story of a curse. It was a story of profound grief, of a father's failure, and a community's casual cruelty. And in the middle of it all was this young woman, who had endured it all with a strength I could barely fathom. I had spent years sealing myself off from the world, in my own fortress of grief. After my wife died, I had chosen isolation. Hers had been forced upon her, and yet her soul wasn't bitter or twisted. It was scarred, yes, but it was still pure. I realized then that the transaction on that first day had been a lie. I thought I was taking on a burden, but the truth was, Elara wasn't the one who was cursed. I was cursed with an empty house, and an even emptier heart.
The confrontation on the porch, and the confession that followed, redrew the map of our world. We were no longer master and servant, creditor and collateral. We were two survivors, two lonely souls who had found an unlikely harbor in one another. The house was no longer silent. It was filled with conversation. I taught her about the books in my library, worlds beyond the confining hills of Harmony Creek. She, in turn, taught me the names of the birds that sang in the mornings, and how to tell the weather by the shape of the clouds. She was teaching me how to see the world again, a world I had long since blocked out. Her presence was a quiet therapy for a wound I never thought would heal. The house felt like a home for the first time since Martha was alive. The smell of her baking, the sight of her kneeling in the vibrant resurrected garden, the sound of her soft humming, it all stitched together the torn fabric of my life. About a month later, I made a decision. It wasn't enough to protect her from the town. She needed to be free of the past, completely. "We're going to see your father," I announced one morning over breakfast. She looked up, her eyes wide with alarm.
"Why?"
"He doesn't want to see me,"
"I think he does."
I said gently, "and I think you need to see him."
"Not to go back."
"But to move forward." She was hesitant, but she trusted me. The drive to the Blackwood farm was thick with a nervous tension. When we pulled up, Silas was sitting on his porch, looking older and more broken than ever. He saw Elara get out of the truck, and he stood up, his face a canvas of shock, shame, and a desperate, heartbreaking hope. I stayed back, giving them space. I watched as Elara walked towards him, not as the timid, cursed girl who had left, but as a confident young woman. Their first words were quiet, lost to the wind. But then I saw Silas's shoulders begin to shake, and he collapsed into a fit of sobbing, wrapping his arms around his daughter, as if he was afraid she'd vanish. She held him, her own tears flowing freely. It was a painful, messy, and utterly necessary reconciliation. They were not just father and daughter. They were two pieces of a shattered family, finally trying to fit back together. When the tears subsided, I walked up to the porch. Silas looked at me, his eyes red-rimmed.
I don't know how to thank you, Arthur.
He stammered.
You saved her.
She saved herself, I corrected him gently. She was never the one who was cursed, Silas. We were. You with your grief, me with my loneliness, and this whole town with its fear. I looked at the neglected fields, the dilapidated barn. And it's not too late to fix things, I said. A new plan forming in my mind, a plan that had nothing to do with ledgers or profits.
I'll help you.
We'll get this farm working again. Not as a creditor but as a neighbor.
As family.
The resolution wasn't instantaneous. It was slow, hard work. We replanted the fields. We mended the fences, both physical and emotional. Elara divided her time between the two houses, bridging the gap between her past and her future. She brought her father back from the brink of his despair, and she continued to fill my house with a light I thought had been permanently extinguished. The town watched from a distance. Some whispers continued, but they had lost their power. They were just noise now. Our small, resilient world was immune to them. We built our own community, the three of us, founded not on superstition, but on forgiveness and a second chance. Stories like this are everywhere, hidden in the quiet corners of the world. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories of the human heart. I often think back to that day in Silas's farmhouse, to the strange and desperate bargain I accepted. I thought I was a man of logic, making a practical decision. I accepted a farmer's cursed daughter as payment for a debt. But I was the one who was truly in debt, to a life devoid of connection, of warmth, of hope. It took her quiet strength, her resilient and gentle soul, to show me the poverty of my own. She was never the payment for the debt. She was the redemption. And it was my soul, not hers, that was ultimately saved.